you might want to orient yourself like Almatas, you're an amazing man, but you might not want to just have your back to Peter while he's speaking. This is a powerful speaker here, so you might want to move. Anyway, so everybody move yourself into a position where you can be comfortable. And so at this point, it's my great pleasure to introduce half of my successor, half of it's Jacob Marquez Rollison, but the other half is really amazing, Geri Forsberg, as our new co-president of the IJEF. She's going to chair this session. So Geri, come on up.
Thank you. It's really my honor to be able to chair this session, and I'm excited about it. I've been excited about the other sessions, what I'm hearing. It's really wonderful. And I was just mentioning to Peter that I love to see the new young scholars who are coming on board here, and love to see how they're thinking and writing, and it's wonderful. And for those who are a long time, I love to see what you're doing and hear your perspectives. So thank you so much for being here and being a part of this discussion. So this afternoon in this session, we have two outstanding scholars. We have first Peter Fallon, and he's going to be presenting on the rise of neoliberal techniques in the U.S., higher education, and ellulian analysis. And after that, we will have Jake Mark Rollison, who will be presenting on technological morality versus the ethics of freedom. So those are our two speakers. Our first speaker, Peter Fallon, is a distinguished scholar in media ecology. He graduated from the doctoral program in media ecology at New York University, where he studied under the renowned Professor Neil Postman, and we were both in that program together. So Peter is my longtime friend, and I'm really thankful to be able to introduce him. He's the author of 4 amazing books, including 3 Media Ecology Award winners. He wrote Printing, Literacy, and Education in 18th Century Ireland, Why the Irish Speak English, and that received the Marshall McLuhan Award for Outstanding Book in 2007. He wrote The Metaphysics of Media, Toward an End to Postmodern Cynicism and the Construction of a Virtuous Reality, which received the Lewis Mumford Award for Outstanding Scholarship in Technology, and that was in 2010. He wrote the book Cultural Defiance and Cultural Deviance in 2013, and he just finished the book recently on Propaganda 2.1, Understanding Propaganda in the Digital Age, which also just received an award from Media Ecology Award. So today Peter's going to be speaking on the proliferation of neoliberal techniques within the United States higher education, particularly total quality management. And he'll be drawing on Ellul for this presentation. So welcome with me, Peter Fallon.
I'm glad you said your longtime friend and not your old friend, both of which would be true, by the way. Well, to those of us who know Jacques Ellul, we know his thoughts on education as an integral part of the technoculture, a technique itself geared toward developing a person prepared to function efficiently in service to that society. It's a form of sociological propaganda. It bears many of the characteristics of propaganda, not the least of which is, and this is quoting Ellul, both are able to move the mass individual only by massifying him more and more. Education has nothing to do with the individual, development of character, satisfaction of spiritual yearnings, kindling of imagination, etc., and everything to do with the mass. The technoculture demands that the individual subjugate himself to the mass, not for his own sake, but for the sake of the technological society itself. The shared values of the technoculture, productivity, profit, speed, convenience, standardization, maximization, but above all, efficiency, need to be internalized and assimilated if one is not only to survive, but to function properly and even perhaps advance in this milieu. Ellul was, of course, by no means against education as a human institution. He was against the type of education not for the benefit of the individual, but for the benefit of technique. To be clear, there are two types of education to which I will refer in this paper: that of the mass inculcation of technical values and some other kind of education. But what is this other kind of education? And it turns out Ellul never tells us. He calls our attention to the dangers of technological forms of education, but reveals little of his thinking on what might constitute a suitable form. We must envision our own conception of a healthy, personally, and spiritually fulfilling education by hearing only Ellul's description of what it is not. Education, he wrote, no longer has a humanist end or any value in itself. It has only one goal: to create technicians. Therefore, we can infer, education should be humanist rather than technical. But what would constitute a humanist education? Ellul responds, education issuing from technology is the absolute reverse of the culture conceived of as 1, the heritage of works, thoughts, and traditions, and 2, the continuous dimension of theoretical and critical reflection, critical transcendence, and symbolic function. A knowledge of history, then, of the thinkers of the past and of the transcendent narratives that rationalize their worlds seem to be a part of Ellul's conception of a humanist education, along with the theoretical imagination, the development of critical thought, and of value systems within which to make judgments. No contrast can be tolerated, he continues, between teaching and propaganda, between the critical spirit formed by higher education and the exclusion of independent thought. A critical spirit, then, appears to be a goal of education. Finally, Ellul tells us that education and instruction no longer have anything gratuitous about them. They must serve efficiently. So we can assume that Ellul also believes that a proper form of education is gratuitous, pursued not for any useful end, but for its own sake, not only as an instrumental end, but an end in itself. So I conclude that Ellul believed that education should be a humanist process undertaken for its own sake by a rational being focusing on the human heritage of thought and tradition and subjecting these to the critical faculties. I'd like to call this a liberal education, and I think Ellul would not be uncomfortable with this label. We are today being told that a transformation is underway in American higher education. This transformation is explained by two major factors, both central to the neoliberal worldview. 1, cut in state support for higher education, and 2, increased competition from non-traditional educational institutions. Universities have become dependent on tuition due to decreased external funding. Nearly half of the national average institutional cost of educating a student is paid for by tuition, up from 23% in 1988. Roughly 71% of all U.S. graduates finish their schooling in debt. Their average indebtedness rose to $29,400 in 2012 and to $32,000 and more in 2020, an increase of more than 30% over the average indebtedness of 2008. In 2020, the total U.S. Student loan debt was $1.56 trillion. The burden this places on young people is crippling and poses serious challenges for them. Furthermore, the addition of new technologized education platforms has only exacerbated the situation by drawing students away from traditional colleges and universities, making those institutions even more tuition dependent. In alarming rhetoric, we are told that academia is in an existential crisis which demands executive action without regard to the wishes, needs, or aims of faculty. At this point in the paper, I would like to put this all into perspective by introducing a little bit of history. I'll mention it only briefly. It's in the actual paper. If anyone is familiar with the late Supreme Court Justice Lewis F. Powell, in 1971, only months before becoming then President Richard M. Nixon's choice as Associate Justice, he sent a confidential memorandum to a powerful friend in the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. This memo has come to be known as the Powell Memo. I am not going to read the details of it right now, but it really defines the neoliberal, I'm going to try to avoid the phrase right wing, but the neoliberal and neoconservative view of academia as being this hotbed of radical ideas, as it apparently ought not to be, of the media, the myth of the quote-unquote liberal media was born, the proliferation of business lobbyists into Washington, and I urge everybody to read it rather than listen to me describe it. But here are some of the key consequences of the Powell Memo. Increased corporate influence, shift in university priorities, particularly a greater emphasis on business and economics program and STEM programs, often at the expense of the humanities and social sciences. This shift has been driven by funding opportunities from corporations and the perceived need to align educational outcomes with market demands, leading to more career-oriented approach to higher education, increased scrutiny and regulation both by government and the corporate sector, polarization and academic freedom, the push for ideological balance and corporate influence in higher education has contributed to the increasing polarization within academic communities and has had a chilling effect in many cases on academic freedom. And overall, the Lewis Powell Memo set in motion a series of changes that have reshaped the landscape of our entire country, our entire economy, but also of U.S. higher education, emphasizing market-oriented policies, increased corporate involvement, decreased public funding of higher education, and a more polarized academic environment. In the last 3 decades, university administrators across the country, and those of you who work in academia, I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know, have introduced with surprising consistency sets of policies that contain several curiously similar items: the elimination of tenure, the diminution of faculty's role in shared governance, the remediation of what, the strangest phrase I've ever heard, cultural stagnation, an increase in at least faculty productivity, the control of costs, etc. I choose not to question the need for greater institution-wide productivity or the control of costs. I choose not to, indeed, I think these are critical issues for the survival of higher education in the US, just not exactly in the same way or for the same reasons as argued by those who now are in positions of power in US higher education. I argue that the US higher education has adopted a neoliberal free market framework of higher education, a top-down structure of bosses and workers, a commoditization of information mirroring the technological society, which focuses not on the needs of students as citizens and human beings, but on the culturally derived desires of students as consumers and future functionaries of the technological society. And its key is total quality management. TQM is a free market administrative technique that arose in US industry in the 20th century and has, in the last 3 decades, been applied increasingly more frequently to higher education. Its core characteristics include the following: One, the imposition of a top-down approach to management. Two, a view of higher education as a service industry. Three, of students as customers. And four, of an education as a saleable commodity. TQM is predicated on several key principles, which I won't go into in detail, but I will introduce some of them and comment on. One is customer focus. From the point of view of TQM, the student is a customer in a competitive education market. Universities are service providers, and faculty and staff are employees. Administrators become managers charged with implementing TQM. The human and humanistic, and I might say humane, is replaced by the mechanical and the technical. Two, total employee involvement. This is a form, as far as I can tell, of Ellul's category of horizontal propaganda. Work teams and committee services are examples of these horizontal propaganda techniques, which make the vertical imposition of manufactured consensus possible. Three, process-centered. And I always wonder, what processes are the TQM theorists referring to? Are they the critical intellectual processes that we're trying to get our students to develop? Or the manufacturing process wherein we intake customers and output them as graduates? Or the vision of quality management inherent in completely technologized course delivery systems? Four, a strategic and systematic approach. More faculty energy and time is now dedicated to administration-mandated assessment, measurement, the documentation, and adherence to the strategic plan across all disciplines. Faculty now have less time to spend on curricular development and course preparation and management. They need to work longer hours to accomplish the same pedagogical goals that they previously pursued, and consequently their research agenda and or scholarly work suffers. Five, continual improvement. The TQM theorists invoke a model of continuous improvement which includes, quote, demands for improvement from customers, which leads to a cycle of feedback and action plans driven by administrative authority and mandates. Dynamism and change, two characteristics of the larger technological society, are thus integrated into the university. Now, for the purposes of this presentation, I wish to focus on what I believe is the one most significant and troubling aspect of TQM in higher education, and that is the idea of the student as a customer. To see a student as a customer is a very different thing than seeing a student as a human being in the process of self-formation. Such a view assumes a fully formed consumer prepared to make market choices from among a variety of commodities, in this case, choices that likely will have profound consequences for that student's life. In this context, the idea of personal discovery disappears, as does the sense of interior investigation or exploration. The student's immediate judgment of what is and is not relevant is based far too prematurely on an incomplete data set founded on a rich load of messages manufactured by the technological society. The result of the student as customer stance has been the transformation of higher education from an academic experience based on individual learning, inquiry, and self-discovery into a mass-marketed social and recreational experience based on consumption and the values of the technological society. To respond to the demands of the student, it is necessary to adopt further market techniques, as it is in the nature of markets to be not only dynamic, but frequently volatile. Curriculum and pedagogy are no longer important factors in educational quality, nor is the quality of faculty scholarship. What becomes important is the professor's ability to create new courses quickly based on topical trends without regard to whether those courses will be meaningful in the future or add anything of value to the student customer's life. Recruitment and retention, rather than curricular integrity, become key areas of administrative attention, and many colleges have embarked on non-academic construction programs to provide entertainment and leisure activities to address the demands of the student customer in a competitive market. Food courts, spa-like athletic facilities, and elaborate performing arts centers have become increasingly common on college and university campuses. Since the 1990s, U.S. colleges have been engaged in a building boom, with higher education construction spending doubling between 1994 and 2015, peaking at $15 billion in 2006 and leveling off at $11 billion in 2015. Much construction work has focused on sports facilities, since student consumers also seem to want to go to a school with a big formal athletics program. We witness a dramatic increase in spending on athletics in U.S. colleges and universities in recent decades, averaging roughly 30%. Average spending per full-time equivalent student athlete increased nearly 48% between 2003 and 2011. During academic year 2011 and 12, public two-year colleges spent $467 million on athletics. Private four-year institutions spent $5 billion, and public four-year colleges and universities spent $8.3 billion, and that is a lot of money. The fact is that college athletics is a business, seen by many as a money-making one at that. However, a far greater proportion of a college budget per full-time equivalent student is spent on athletics than on academics. About 3 times as much in an NCAA Division I school, as much as 6 times as much in an NCAA Division I school with a football team with bowl game qualifications. The cost of these programs drains resources that would otherwise go to teaching and learning. And I think this is a big problem for U.S. students and their families. It's also true that the decline in state support for higher education has been more than offset by increases in tuition. The average total tuition, fees, room, and board rates charged for full-time undergraduate students in degree-granting institutions rose roughly 210%, from $11,138 in 1985-86 to $23,835 in 2017 and 18. And this is not a partisan issue. Quote, enrollment at America's leading universities has been increasing dramatically, rising nearly 15% between 1993 and 2007, according to the very conservative Goldwater Institute. But they also write, and this is a quote, higher education has not become more efficient. Instead, universities now have more administrative employees and spend more on administration to educate each student. In short, universities are suffering from administrative bloat, expanding the resources devoted to administration significantly faster than spending on instruction, research, and service. And as education adopts a free market model, it is inevitably managed according to free market principles. And the very idea of shared governance is seen by many as Marxist anathema. The top-down management labor model is, by its nature, much more confrontational than collegial. And it is here, I believe, that we find the most destructive consequences of free market technique. In the system of higher education characteristic of the technological society, the management class proliferates, and access to meaningful information and communication at the institutional level plummets. Without the explicit consent of faculty, non-academic administrators and staff begin to outnumber professors and departmental clerical staff. Is there any way to imagine that these changes have constituted quality improvements in U.S. higher education? What benefits have we seen in higher education as a result of neoliberal free market techniques? What have been the costs? From an Ellulian point of view, the answer to the first question is a qualified yes, there have been benefits. There has been a business expansion, resulting in the creation of jobs and the accrual of power in academic boardrooms and executive offices. But at the same time, what has the cost been to higher education, particularly to that humanistic or liberal view of education? We can't be certain, but we have some clues. Free market technique and the values of the technoculture have undoubtedly played a role in increasing costs. Competition, marketing, and the elusive goal of quality take a toll not only on customers, but on faculty, staff, and the educational experience itself. The managerial class ascends, the customer, service, and technical classes follow, and teaching faculty become little more than an afterthought. So in conclusion, I want to propose some basic principles, a manifesto, if you will, that I believe are fundamental to whatever resistance may in the future arise against free market education techniques. They are: 1, a recommitment to the principles of tenure and shared governance to protect academic freedom. Without them, meaningful shared governance is impossible. 2, protect curricula from market-driven changes and emphasize critical thinking and humanist education. 3, commit to genuine administrative transparency. Publish university operating budgets, both in the future and retroactively. And administrators should be held accountable for their decisions and should be subject to evaluation and review as a condition of contract renewal. 4, reduce administrative payrolls to the extent that there exist redundancies in administration and or new administrative departments not directly connected with academics. 5, prioritize the hiring of full-time faculty over adjuncts. It says 7. 6, if an audit of a university's operating budget supports such a move, end organized athletic programs and replace them with informal intramural team sports. 7, recommit to the idea of the university as an educational institution dedicated to the formation of enlightened, critical, and curious young people, not as an adjunct to the marketplace. Increasingly, education is another word whose meaning is fluid and dependent on who is using it and what their intentions are. It's become a slogan. It's up to actual educators, however, to define the word if we have the guts. And I'm hopeful we'll define the word in such a way that it liberates our young people rather than preparing them to be effective, productive, and efficient functionaries of the technological society. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That was very insightful. I totally agree. I am in the university and higher education, and I see exactly what Peter's talking about.